Welcome, everybody, to the Grace Hudson Museum's virtual program today. My name's David Burton. I'm the director of the museum and really happy that you could join us today. This is the third of four programs that we have put together tied to the exhibition Deep Roots Spreading Branches, Fine Woodworking of the Krenov School. And today's program we're calling through the years, Insights from Krenov Instructors. And we were very fortunate to have three people today who were very influential, either in the beginning of the school, the development of the school, and the continuing excellence of the school. And they are Creighton Hoke, David Welter, and Laura Mays, and you'll meet all of them in a moment. I want to take a second to acknowledge the original caretakers of the land. The Grace Hudson Museum is in southern Mendocino County, and along with Lake and Sonoma counties, our neighboring counties, we share an area that comprises the ancestral homelands of the Pomo peoples. At the Grace Hudson Museum, we strive to honor this land by bringing truth and nuance to the human stories we tell. From wherever you are joining us, we urge you to get to know the history, experience, and cultures of the Native peoples in your area. So today, as I mentioned at the top, we're joined by Creighton Hoke, who's on the East Coast in North Carolina. We have David Welter and Laura Mays, who are in Fort Bragg. Also, Alyssa Bogue, who is the museum's curator of education and exhibits, is here. She also curated the Krenov School exhibition. She'll be moderating the question and answer box. So with that, I want to get started by asking Creighton, David, and Laura if they would go ahead and introduce themselves, a little bit about your background, and tell us in 4 or 5 minutes, what was your path that led you to the Krenov School? Let's start with Creighton.
Okay. Well, I'm Creighton Hoke. I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley and Switzerland around a lot of wood and stone. So after I got a degree in philosophy in the UK and worked on a dairy farm for a while, and then moved to Richmond with a kind of vague idea that I would learn how to become what I thought of as a traditional carpenter. And it turns out I had a pretty naive idea of what carpenters actually do. My first job was building chicken barns for Holly Farms. And then I moved on to residential framing and interior finishing, and eventually to high-end cabinet making down in Shockoe Slip in Richmond. We did libraries and fancy restaurants and bars. But there was always this kind of tension between what I wanted to learn and what people would be willing to pay for or be willing to pay for me to learn. So the amount of handwork I was able to do was pretty limited. And in fact, I kept being told that it wasn't happening. So when I saw Jim's first book and saw that there was at least one person on the planet who was actually apparently doing this, it was kind of a bolt from the blue. And so I started paying attention. I read his book, obviously, like all of us have done. And I managed to slide into the second round of summer workshops that Jim held around in 1980, I think. And after those workshops, Jim and I got along, which was good. And after those workshops, I went back to Richmond and quit my job and packed up my dog and my table saw and moved to Fort Bragg, figuring that I would work for a year and then enroll as a student in this new school. I was living in a tree house out in the Redwoods, and things seemed pretty cool. So that's kind of how I came to the coast.
All right. Thank you, Creighton. David, how about you?
Well, I'm surprised at how similar our backgrounds were. I grew up on a farm, a dairy farm. My first job full-time off the farm was I put cabinets in Winnebagos. I did that for a couple of years, then got employed by a real old school carpenter with just him and his son and me. And he was a real caring carpenter. We did small jobs and, you know, it was pretty satisfying. But Iowa winters are brutal. So I looked for an inside job and got one at an architectural millworks, you know, similar to Creighton's situation. We had interesting work. We built for banks and churches and retail outlets. And it was kind of fun to translate architectural's imaginations into something real. So, you know, there was always a challenge to it. The place got bought up by somebody who didn't know what he was doing, and I applied then to a woodworking school in Missoula, put down a down deposit or some money down. And after that, I saw that in Fine Woodworking an ad for the College of the Redwoods, and Krenov was teaching it. So I applied for that. And largely to Creighton's credit, I guess, he imagined there was some promise in my attendance. And my wife, Laura, and I drove out here in 1982. And I was a 2-year student then. And that was where I started.
Okay. And that was the College of the Redwoods at that time, oversaw the program.
That's right.
And Laura, how about you? You are one of the internationals who arrived at the school.
Yes, I'm an international. I was born and grew up in Ireland and on the Dublin, suburbs of Dublin. And I studied architecture then after high school, and I enjoyed my education, my architecture education enormously, although actually reflecting on it, I must have had some inkling that it wasn't quite right, because I dropped out for a year and went to art school, the Glasgow School of Art, for a year, but then came back and finished off my architecture degree. And then started kind of working as an architect and realized how much I really did not enjoy it at all. And I didn't like working in it. It seemed just like an office job with some kind of added non-benefits of having to go out and tell people what to do when I didn't really know what to do myself. And so I knew I didn't like it, but I didn't really know what I liked. And I kind of kicked around the world for a while. I was in Japan for a little bit and worked in New York. I worked as a graphic designer. But then I discovered a little woodworking school in the on the west coast of Ireland. And I went there for 2 years. And I remember I'd only been there a few days when I was like, this is really good. I really like this. And so, yeah, I stayed there for 2 years. And then I tried to have a little kind of furniture making business, which revealed to me how much I didn't know. And I started teaching in the architecture school at that time as well, just one morning a week. And I somewhere in there, I read Krenov books. I do remember pulling with vacant hands off of a bookshelf in a bookstore in Dublin and being like, oh my God, this stuff is incredible. Like, who are these people? And and you know, on the back cover, there it was. James Krenov lives, works, and teaches in Fort Bragg, California. And I Googled it. And it was David Welter had put up a very nice little website. And I think I must have been a very early Googler. And there it was. I was like, well, I mean, I wondered, could I go there? And I wrote, and David replied, and I came for 2 years, from 2001 to 2003.
All right. Laura, before I ask Creighton a question, would you please let people know about the background in your shot? Anybody who's been to our exhibition or been to the school knows what that is, but for those who don't, maybe you can share with us.
Yeah, this is the photo taken by Tina's husband, David, and it's of the workshop. Just this, whatever, I guess it was about around end of April this year. You can see those of you who haven't been there for a while, you can see how much it hasn't changed.
All right. Well, thank you. Creighton, I'm going to bounce back to you here. First of all, what do you remember about your time studying with James Krenov? And then what do you remember about how the school got started and your role in that?
Yeah, well, so after a few months in the treehouse, winter came and it started getting kind of chilly and the house kind of banged back and forth in the wind. And it dawned on me that not a lot was actually happening. to make the school a reality. Plus, I was cold and wet. So what the College of the Redwoods did do was approve a part-time job to support the development of the school. But all of the people, or almost all of the people who'd been involved in bringing Jim and getting him involved and so forth and so on, already had lives on the coast. They were busy conducting those lives and making ends meet and so forth and so on. There wasn't somebody left over to go be a bureaucrat. So I discovered my inner bureaucrat and took the part-time job, got warm and dry, and worked with a guy called Larry Kavanaugh, who was the director of the College of the Redwoods on the coast at that time. And I worked with him locally and with Jim over a scratchy long distance line to pretty much design and specify and wrangle materials for every single aspect of the program. I was telling Laura earlier that I can't decide whether looking at the picture behind her makes me feel warm and fuzzy or gives me, sort of flashbacks, because the fact is we argued over every single aspect of that building when we designed it. What the nature of the floors were, the benches, the cabinets, the ceiling tiles, we almost came to blows over the skylights and whether we would have curtains over them and all that stuff. But we also, Michael Burns really did the main design, and then I worked with College of the Redwoods to order workbenches and cabinets and machinery and hand tools and clamps and glue and dowels. And that was all basically to Jim's specification, either explicit when I talked to him, or implicit because I read the books and saw what he had and tried the best I could to get that. So did all of that, did the PR for the program so that David saw the ad, in Fine Woodworking magazine, and did the application and development package and arranged for the teachers to be hired because they had to have job descriptions, and then helped Jim select the applications. And then finally, I imported Jim and Brita and the cat and their container of wood and machinery, and I drove down to San Francisco to pick him up, and in my pickup truck, and Brita rode in the middle, trying to avoid the gear shift all the way up from SFO, and that's what I did. That was how it came to pass.
And did College of the Redwoods at that time, did they give you kind of free hand to go after this, or what kind of controls were they?
Well, I wouldn't call it a free hand. I mean, Larry taught me. He was my first bureaucrat mentor, and he taught me to write. I wanted to write multi-topic memos because those who know me know I go on. He said no, a single topic. So there was this blizzard of emails coming out of the a blizzard of memos with carbons coming out of my IBM Selectric that I was given, ordering one thing at a time. And there was pushback on different things, but I mean, Larry was a terrific advocate, and Bob Wynn was also. So I mean, the College of the Redwoods was, looking back on it, I don't think you'd get that today. I mean, they were absurdly supportive. I mean, in retrospect, I couldn't order anything I wanted, but within, I mean, they were happy to have the program configured around the man and what he had described.
Right. And what about, do I have this correct, Creighton, that you helped develop the initial curriculum for the school?
Well, yeah, somebody had to.
Well, had you ever done anything like that before, and how did you go about it?
No, I hope I'd made it clear. I haven't done anything like this before. I mean, I just came out of the treehouse and, and the dairy farm. I don't know. But like I said, Larry helped me develop my internal bureaucrat, and the curriculum is pretty easy. You read the books. Oh, and we also had the summer programs, right? So the summer programs was the tools and techniques, and then a project and so forth and so on. So you just had to write that down in the format that the that the College of the Redwoods wanted to see so that they could post those and, you know, be reimbursed by the state and so forth and so on. I mean, it was a thing you had to do to get paid.
Mhm.
And I could figure that out.
Yeah. And what was putting together a curriculum compatible with the way James Krenov wanted to teach?
No, and yes, I mean, you know, Jim was never a fan of authority necessarily, unless it was him. But I mean, we worked it out. I mean, I think that one of the keys all along is Jim finding on the coast people who would, at the beginning, in the middle, and, you know, and throughout his time there, be willing to run interference between Jim and what Antonia Lamb on the Mendocino radio used to call the world of official reality. And that was his good fortune, and ours too.
All right. David Welter, I'm going to bounce back to you and ask you how you came to become a staff member at the school, and how your role at the school might have evolved over time.
Well, it was just a matter of being at the right place at the right time. Michael DeHaven, who had the job of shop aide or instructional aide, was somebody I admired for his cleverness in coming up with solutions for production. And he did clean work, and and he was there 5 days a week. The other instructors are there a day and a half, 3 days. And so he provided some continuity. Well, he left in the middle of the second semester of the 4th year of the program. And I had, after completing my 2 years, gone to a cooperative shop that once belonged to Creighton and Michael and Jim Krenov. And some students started going there in their places. And I worked there for about 1.5 years when DeHaven left, and there was sort of like, who's around to do this? And there I was, jumped right in. So, and how it changed, well, it was primarily a secretarial job. I'd take care of ordering stuff, responding to correspondence. Kind of fell to me to arrange summer classes. We initially had a mailing list of about 800 people. We send out this informational brochure. And the first 2 years I was working, the college had one computer, this little K Pro portable computer that had 2 floppy disks, and everything. So I borrowed from this college office and printed out this mailing list and sent them off. And initially we'd get upwards of 60, I think, applications, for the first couple of years. It declined steadily, but within 8 years, it leveled out to the mid-30s, and that's been pretty constant ever since. So, and given there's 17 new students each year, that's 2 applications for each bench. So, it was nice to, we were a bit selective, and that I think helped the quality of the output. In ways that are grew, well, I just kind of invented ways to make things easier for students. There was no photography early on. When somebody got their project done, they might hire a local photographer to take some semi-professional photographs, but there wasn't anything regular. I remember one time Jim he was nuts about cameras for a while, buying a new one every 16 months or so. He lent his camera to somebody who was taking photos, and the guy gave the camera back, and Jim says, "Well, where's my camera? Where are my slides?" he expected the results from those. So about that time, I decided somebody ought to be documenting this, and I started doing the photographs. I put some effort in collecting lumber for the wood room. When I first got there, there was a lot of big leaf maple and several planks that said JK. And there wasn't a whole lot of selection, so people would go down to the Bay Area to big yards and bring back stock. They'd go back, a couple of people go down and come back, and so I started augmenting that. Now, Jim contributed a bit to that too. In the second year of the program, he had a shipment of wood come from Stockholm from his favorite dealer. And a couple of years later, one of our graduates reordered for another lot. In each of those situations, there were several investors. So the division of that lumber was rather dramatic. I kind of thought it was like the treasure of the Sierra Madre, who got what plank. It gradually got to be we had people come from local or regional sawyers would come too with some wood of varying qualities. Most didn't really understand what we were after. We did have one guy come down from BC with some really nice figured big leaf maple. So, keeping the wood supply was a big part of the job. And then maintenance. Now, that job position was not a technician. It wasn't really my purview to mess with the electronics of machines or even with the machines themselves, but somebody had to do it. So, that became another kind of duty that I picked up. I did a newsletter for a few years. One of our grads set up the outline of our initial website, and I populated that. So, just busy. Kept books on people's projects and their costs and everything. There was no end. And I got to help too out in the classroom. With one instructor and 23 people, there was always somebody who wasn't being attended to, and so that was pretty satisfying. That part too.
David, before you actually had a role on the staff at the Krenov School, you did go through the Krenov program, right?
That's right.
And what was your experience as a student like?
Well, I thought I died and gone to heaven. To be around these people that had similar desires to mine, to be creative in a meaningful manner. And when I started, there were 4 second-year students. Jim called them the 4 horsemen. And boy, we all thought those people really know what's going on, and they were just kind of revered. And there's one of those people that he stayed with us last month, that we're still in contact, still friends. Michael Burns would tell people at the beginning of the year that you'll gain weight here and make a friend for life. And that's one example of a friend that kept all this time. So, and that sense of community is one of the greatest things about that program. And I wished more than once to be able to identify just how that happened. And I was talking to a former student some time ago about it. He says, well, that was Michael Burns. He said, Michael cared not only for your project, but for your personal lives. He'd see if somebody was having trouble and couldn't focus, and he'd find out why. So people call him Father Burns, including Krenov for a period. So.
It was Michael, but it was also you, David.
Well, gradually.
Michael was another influential person. He passed away recently, if I recall.
Yeah, on Valentine's Day. And we had talk about the community. Over the years, we'd had some reunions. We had one on the 10th and the 20th and 25th, and people came from all the years from far away. Our 20th, yeah, it was in 2001. We had 3 people here from Israel at our celebrations on September 9th. And, a lot of people didn't get home right away, but, so, and for Michael's memorial, it was just overwhelming. We had a gathering at the school shop, and, people from the entire run of the school were there. And I got to thinking that there have been 12 years of students that didn't have Michael as an instructor. And, he was still always involved, but, he still meant something to those people too. Did I answer a question?
Yeah, of course you did. Yeah, thank you so much. We're going to shift over to Laura here. Laura, by the time you arrived at the school was pretty well established. And so I want to ask you a couple of questions, but I want to start by asking you about your experience as a student at the school.
I mean, I think it was quite archetypal, and David has described it very well, what the experience was like. I do remember that 20th anniversary, because a lot of people showed up at the school, and we had just started, we'd only been at the school for 2 weeks, and I was like, who are all these people, and why are they so interested in me? Like, I didn't understand that that's the way it is. It's a community, and people are interested in who's the new students. And I kind of, I think again, as has been said before, I came for Krenov, but what I found was a community of people that was incredibly supportive, and the immersion into this, just going deeper and deeper into work, and having that kind of luxury of almost a kind of timelessness that you could, well, at least you can forget about time for a while. And it was just great. I remember I hadn't come to visit before I arrived on the first day, because it seems like a long way to come to check it out. So I thought, well, if I don't like it, I'll just leave. That's all right. And again, I'd only been here 2 weeks or so when I was like, I think I'll be staying. And I have.
Would it be fair to say that the experience of being a student with James Krenov met your expectation when you looked through that book that you got off the shelf at a Dublin bookstore?
He was a different person than the person that I knew through the books. And it was his last year of teaching, and I think he was in the process of pulling himself back from it. And no, he was not the same person as I knew from the books, but the place and the work that was being done was. Yeah.
And moving on from that, how did you later become involved as an instructor? And then obviously you've been program director there now for about a little over 10 years, I think.
Yeah, it's going on. This is it's going to be 13 years. I got a letter in the mail as living and working, teaching in the west of Ireland, and I got a letter in the mail from the dean of the Coast Centre. It must have been Creighton referred to Larry Kavanagh, and this was a guy called Jesse Lee, who was the dean of the Coast Centre, and he said that Michael was planning to retire, and would I be interested in applying?
Michael Burns.
Michael Burns, sorry, yeah. And it seemed although I'd been there for 2 years, it seemed like a very long way away and a huge thing to do. But I thought I would apply, and I did, and interviewed. I remember it was March 26th on the interview, because it's my mum's birthday, and so came over for the interview. And I remember driving over the bridge from the Coast Centre. Actually, Laura Welter gave me a lift in her car. Driving over the Noyo Bridge there and having this weird feeling, because I'd been a student, 10 years before that I I know this place. I know this place really well, and I like it a lot. And it was this feeling of having two places in the world, like, you know, my whole life in Ireland, and then this other place that I also knew really well. And so yeah, I applied and I got the job.
So I just want a little clarity on your timeline. So you were at the school for a year and a half, couple of years as a student?
Well, 2 years, 2 9-month programs, as it were. Yeah. So from August of 2001 to May of 2003. And then I went back to Ireland and then came back in the August of 2011 with a lot of visa issues. I have to say, I was late coming back from my first day on the job because I was paid back because of my immigration visa. But yeah, and then
what did you do the intervening time, seven or so odd years in Ireland? Were you practicing woodworking during that time?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Myself and Rebecca Yaffe was in my class, and we were together, and we had a workshop together, and moved at first over on the east coast of Ireland, and then we moved it over to the west coast of Ireland to the college I taught, first part-time and then full-time at the college where I had been a student. At that time, it was called the Galway Mayo Institute of Technology. Since changed its name.
So you were able to gain considerable experience as a woodworking instructor in Ireland, sounds like.
Yeah.
How about the idea of directing the school? Was that appealing to you?
I mean, no. I remember asking in the interview, like, what do you actually do? Like, how much, what happens? Like, what is the bureaucracy involved? And I mean, it seems like, I don't know if it sounds too far to say a necessary evil, but you know, a part of the whole deal. Like, if you want to have this thing, it's got to be managed, you know.
Right. Well, the next question I'm gonna ask, I'm just gonna throw open to all three of you, and just jump in if you want to respond. Curious what it was like to know, what it was like getting to know James Krenov, learning from him, and then later working alongside him. Obviously, that's less key to you, Laura, as he was retired by then. But what about getting to know James Krenov, and then for the others, what it was like working alongside him?
Take her away, Creighton.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to hear Laura talk about that moment when he was getting ready to separate himself from the program. He had been he'd been quite charming during the summer workshops. Otherwise, I don't think even I would have been foolish enough to go back to Richmond, quit a job, and drive out on the prom. So we got along very well. But he was never less than in my experience, he was never less than intense in everything, including tennis. I mean, everything was. Yeah, no, I think I'd stay with intense, but that was fine with me because I was pretty intense myself. So if you could meet him at that time, when in the beginnings of the school, if you could meet him in the workshops for that matter, that summer, if you could meet him in that intensity and that focus on what was happening, then he was very generous and could be really helpful. And if he thought you were unserious or wrong-headed, he didn't really have a politeness mode. Really. And so for a long time, I thought, well, this is great. I'm not getting that treatment. I'm getting this other treatment. And I sort of mistook that a little bit for a while for virtue in myself, rather than just an interaction and with an unusually focused and intense man. So I think that over time, that became, you know, my sense is that over time, that plus his problems with authority, which I actually share, but I could sort of mute somewhat, you know, made for some really difficult mediation. It could be really hard to mediate between Jim and the College of the Redwoods, or whatever the world of official reality was, because he didn't have an off switch for that. And maybe not always, if I'm being frank, not always an ability to say thank you or to even recognize what was being done. So I think that was stressful. But I think that for a long time, and I can't say, David would know, but for a long time, I think the students that he related to most effectively were the ones who somehow brought that focus and intensity there. I don't think it necessarily had to do with making things like he did. It wasn't a clone type of thing, but I think he was profoundly committed to what he did, for better or worse. And I think it's not like he expected it. It's just he failed to recognize people if they weren't. Something like that.
Yeah. David, how about you?
Well, I guess my first experience was with him as an instructor, and thank goodness for the part-timers, at least in my case. Jim had a real sense of who had some latent talent and a soft spot for tortured souls. And I didn't really meet either of those qualifications. So our interaction wasn't very regular, although, you know, there were a few times he was pretty supportive, but I can't say with confidence that he paid a lot of attention to what I was working on. I never, as a student, had any quarrel with him or anything like that. But I really depended a lot on the part-time instructors. As I became employed, well, the system was pretty much set up and running. All I had to do was keep it going. And Jim had kind of removed himself for any responsibility for management, and that was just fine with the administration, because he was just a real stick in the bicycle wheel for them. He'd make his expectations clear, and we'd do the best we could to see that could happen. There'd be students that he'd hardly talk to at all. If he needed to be needed, and if somebody was independent, they didn't get quite the attention. That kind of sums it up, I think, as far as his relationship with students in general. It got, as the years went on, he did become more prickly. He had his bench moved his bench into the student bench room, in the 87 or so, I think. Just after I left, he took the bench I had. And I figured that was fitting. Who better to take my place? But he was there for a good 14 years, I think. And it got increasingly difficult for, initially people really enjoyed, getting to see the progress of the things that he was working on. And he could be sharing in that situation. But, sometimes you could tell you didn't want to go anywhere near that bench. But it kind of became increasingly difficult. He kind of developed an antipathy to Michael Burns, kind of calling him a carpenter and kind of castigating him for having never been a student. He doesn't know what's going on. And one time during the summer class, Jim Budlaw was giving instruction, and Jim was back in the corner, and as Jim was talking, Krenov says, "No." And Budlaw was just dumbfounded. He stopped and said, "Well, what then?" And Jim ignored him. So I kind of tried to polish that up awkwardly. And there had been a student that was favored of his in their first year. Their bench was right across from Jim's. In the second year, that person moved to the other end of the building. It just wasn't pleasant to be around him. He did, I think in '97, move his bench to an addition in the back where he could work in private and take a nap in private. For a time, there were two signs on the door that said, please knock, and please do not disturb. And that was kind of a trick of his, I think, to keep you off balance. When he might, he was interviewed by a board member of the Renwick one time, and it's recorded somewhere. The name's escaping me at the moment, but the interviewer asked him, some question, and Jim snapped at him, "Well, if you read my books, you wouldn't have to ask that question." And after that, they got along famously, but it just seemed, Jim would kind of attack first and then get you off balance, and you'd kind of try to placate him, and then everything was groovy. So.
David, did you have much interaction or contact with him after he retired?
Not right off the bat, because he left in such a fury. He told me we should just close the school down. He was just satisfied with the part-time teachers that we had take. When Michael became the director, there was a part-time job that had to be filled, and Jim wasn't tickled about that. He wasn't tickled about Michael being a director. In his last commencement address, he said, "When I'm gone, this will be a very fine technical school." And that was not a compliment coming from Krenov, really angry. So no initial, it was something. And a favored student of his set up a school in British Columbia, and this fellow was, somebody that Jim really got along with well, and it was mutual. And this fellow had real sensitivity that Jim admired, and they got along famously. And Jim kind of helped him get that school started. And then on that website, he said, if I was going to school in my youth, I'd go to this one. It kind of just dumped us. But I gradually started going over there on Sundays, about once every 3 weeks or so, and sit with him and Brita until he started getting crabby again. It was time to go. So we parted on good terms, I'm happy to say. I fell error. He had to give up making cabinets. One of our graduates finished his last cabinet and gone into making hand planes. He's producing hand planes, and I went out there once in the shop, and he said, "Oh, look at it, I'm doing it this way now." He always said it was curiosity that kept him going, and he was just still kind of with something he'd done 1,000 times. He was still, "Oh, what happens if I do this?" And I think that was one great redeeming quality that he had. But he was showing me he was cutting this little piece of wood on the bandsaw, and he couldn't see, and I'd swear he just felt the breeze off the bandsaw blade to know how close he was. But he had to give that up, and when he called me one time, he couldn't get this router to work. Would I come and look at it? Well, he'd gotten the cord wrapped in the bit and cut the cord partially, and he plugged it back in, or the cord was still plugged in and bare wire sticking out. I replaced that cord on a Thursday, and I can't remember, Saturday he called, said, "Somebody better get this stuff out of here before I hurt myself." So I fell heir to his bench, primarily, and you know, a few other things. But by that time, he'd given a lot of things away. So, yeah.
Laura, did you have any interaction with Jim Krenov when you became program director in the years after?
Well, he had passed away by the time I was director. So, but he was teaching for during my first year, and then not in my second year. He retired between my first and second year. But I actually didn't have a lot of interaction with him during the year that he was. We did overlap by, and I went out to his house once. Then during my second year, for a kind of a tea with him in Brisbane. It was very, very nice, but it was not sort of a deeply engaging situation. I'd like to go back to the question you asked before. You asked me like about being program director, and I took the question to mean the liaison with the college administration, which, as I said, it's a kind of just a necessary in order to have the program the way it is. But I want to say that how much there's another whole aspect to the role, which is, you know, leading the program and deciding, you know, what happens, and that part is an absolute pleasure, and it's something that, you know, I'm turning around in my mind all the time, like what its relationship with Krenov is, like what is the school's relationship with Krenov and his work and his writings, and how does it manifest itself in kind of very practical ways in the classroom? Like how much does his work get invoked or sort of called upon? To what you know, basically, I feel like I do have an ongoing relationship with him and all his work and his writings, even though I actually had very minimal interaction with him as a person.
Right. But how about the interaction with his books? They seem to have been very influential to a lot of people who have been through the program. Yeah,
I mean, I find them just beautifully written. I sometimes think that my whole life has kind of changed or been formed by a kind of a style, a literary style. The way they're written, they kind of roll along. You could pull one off the shelf and just open it kind of at random and find yourself 15 pages later just caught up. It feels almost like one long sentence or one long thought, or a thought that keeps kind of transmuting itself. And it was really interesting to find out that he wrote them by speaking into a tape recorder, that he got a tape recorder for his 50th birthday. And they have that quality of someone who's a really good storyteller, and he just brings you along. And so whether it's talking about a real kind of fine detail of making, or his attitude towards art and craft, it's all wrapped in there. In fact, some of the stuff I find almost I wouldn't say offensive, but certainly ideas that don't resonate with me, differences between art and craft and things like that. But I do think that the way he rolls them out is just really kind of very enticing, entrancing, mesmerizing, and it was kind of that combined with his kind of attitude towards the person standing at the bench, the person doing the work, in his case him, or in each one of our cases ourselves, that comes out in the books, that really drew me to it. I felt like so many books are, tell you how to do stuff and tell you how to do it really well, and that his books weren't like that at all. They were kind of like almost like about your feelings as you were making mistakes, things like that, which it was deeply refreshing. Yeah.
And we do have our first question, which is probably mostly for you, Laura. Peter is interested in how the program survived the transition away from the College of the Redwoods to the Mendocino Community College, and kind of how does it work now? Is it an independent entity? How does it work?
No, we're not an independent entity. We now have so College of the Redwoods is a California community college, and Mendocino College is a California community college. And really the transfer occurred because of issues that were going on at the College of the Redwoods main campus in Eureka, a kind of combination of an accreditation crisis and a financial crisis caused them to look at their whole operation and to see that coast campus, which is far away, or at least like a 3.5 hour drive away. Anyway, they kind of were like, well, let's just get rid of that anyway. And our nearest community, already it was slightly anomalous that we were connected with College of the Redwoods up in Eureka, because it's further away than our nearer community college that's based over in Ukiah. And they took over the whole coast campus. It happened at a time when the rules changed about repeating courses. And it did mean that the coast campus in general was really plummeting in its enrollments. This is not to do with the woodworking program, but in general, in all its classes, all its other classes. And so it was not seen as necessarily a great, I don't know, the coast campus was in kind of free fall for enrollment, accepting the woodworking program. Anyway, we were just handed over in a kind of bundle to Mendocino College, and got a different bunch of deans and vice president and things like that. But the setup is exactly the same in terms of the relationship of the program to the main administration of the college. The deal was well handled. We all kept everything really was from a kind of outward perspective. The name sign came down and a new sign went up, and really about the extent of the changes. The curriculum is exactly the same, the instructors are the same. So
I have just two other questions to ask all of you. Alyssa, are there other questions coming from the audience?
Nope, that's just the one we have, and I'm curious if we have the same two questions left.
Okay, so to all of you on our panel, I want to ask you how you view the Krenov School and its place in the broader woodworking community, both the local community and the larger worldwide woodworking community. And why does the school matter?
Well, I'll start with that because I'm the least qualified to answer some ways. I've been away from the woodworking world too long to have anything useful really now to say about its place in the world. But the fact that it has survived and thrived, you can hear what Laura is saying about enrollment being sustained. You can hear David talk about the challenges that came along the way, and yet people continue to want to do this. People continue to want, as I did, 40 some years ago, want a particular kind of experience, a particular way of engaging with work. I happen to think it's not confined to the work of hands and eyes, but that's just me being peculiar. But I do think that desire for meaningful engagement with the material and learning how to be skillful with the world around you is something that this school has always managed to continue to offer. And that, for me, would be the reason why it remains relevant in the woodworking world that I no longer understand, but also in the world at large, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's important that it exists and that people get a chance to live this way and try their best to be as good as they can be by paying attention. So that's what I'd say to that.
All right. David, Laura, anything to add?
Gee, something you said, Creighton, and I was going to go somewhere with it. I always, not a lot of people going through the class manage to do this kind of work to make a living. And Jim was always kind of aghast that people had the idea that they could. He certainly didn't, make a living at it. But I always thought, we've had graduates go into a wide variety of fields after having been in the program. But I always thought, even if you were a ditch digger, you'd be a better ditch digger than you were before you came here. And, you know, there's just ideals about how you work that apply to whatever you're doing.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the greatest takeaways in that respect. I don't feel that we still quite get the regard from certain parties in the broad field, but I think most of us are just fine with that. So, you know.
Laura, you're in a unique position to talk about the Krenov School's place in the larger woodworking world. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it holds a certain position, you know, as part of, it's on the spectrum of woodworking. It holds down kind of one end probably, which is a very intensive. Well, I mean, everything that Creighton and David said about a meaningful engagement with work and a kind of romantic and idealistic kind of outlook, and about kind of learning to live this way. I think Creighton used that phrase. I think it holds down an end of the spectrum that is very focused, very I mean, I don't want to, David said that kind of cursed the school by saying it would be technical, but I think it does hold down, it has high regard for craft and for the finer points of craft, and going deep into that. I think so much of the school, the way it was set up was so good that it's keeping that going. Like it's so intensive and immersive. You're there for 9 months for 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, kind of minimum. Really trying to get people to go home and sleep is part of the job. And to have that degree of intensity and immersion is just unusual in the world these days. People often say at the end of the program that, you know, I'm a different person, but this has changed me. And I'm always intrigued, like what way change? And people find it much harder to answer that part. They just feel that they are changed, or that, and I think part of it is about kind of facing yourself. It's like facing yourself and what you have done, like literally on the bench. Like you can't kind of get away from the fact if something is not the way you want it to be. You made it that way, make it differently, or learn to accept it. Or, you know, there's a lot of kind of internal work that goes on. And I think that is probably difficult to get in other ways, and is unusual in a world where we are, you know, distracted and pulled around. Just to be able to have that degree of focus. So I think that's what the, you know, I think the school holds down that end of the spectrum. It's not the only way to do craft by any means. I think there are a myriad of ways to be a crafts person, and it's one of them. It's the one that I'm engaged with.
All right. My final question is this to each of you, same question. Do you have a favorite memory from your time at the school? And maybe before any of you answers that, maybe you have a second to think about it. Alyssa, are there any other questions from the audience right now?
Yes, there is. And I actually have a question or two too. So Matthew wants to know, for all of you, what do you love about teaching Krenov's style of woodworking? And what is your most profound role when working with students?
Would you run that through again, Alyssa?
Yeah. So for all of you, what do you love about teaching Krenov's style of woodworking? And what is your most profound role when working with students? Like, you know, I know when you were talking about Michael, he really saw that interpersonal part of things as being incredibly important, which I think it was for students as well.
Well, I can start with the second part of that question pretty readily. And I never got tired of seeing people's reaction when they got their first plane to produce a silky, steady shaving. And that was just satisfying to them and to us as instructors that they got it. You know, they learned so much in making a plane. paying attention to small tolerances, how things go together, what can, how to analyze what's going wrong. So it's a real, and it just really represents Jim's approach to craft, that you're totally immersed in what you are doing. Here you've made a tool out of a block of wood that's behaving like you would wish it would, and you're using it on a project that you're pouring your heart into. Maybe that answers both parts of the question. I won't pretend it does.
I'd like to make sure that I'd like to second and third and fourth what Laura said about being present for what you've actually done. I think something that a gentle instructor can do and should do is help the student realize this is what you made. If it, like you said, Laura, if it doesn't suit you, here's how we can go in a different direction. If you don't want to go in a different direction, this is the work you did. And that sounds simple, but it is actually real work. And tying with what David said too, you can't get that plane to work by accident. You can only pay attention. Even focus is not quite the same thing. I can remember students who were focused to a fairly well in some ways, and not in a good way, who never arrived at the result. There's a way of being present for what is happening with your hands and your tools, and the result that is, it's a form of attention, but it's not just obsession. And I think teaching that, or being able to be present for that, is a big deal.
That's perfect.
All right, I will return now to all of you for a favorite memory of your time at the school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I may be making this up, but I'm going to make it up and nobody will know. So the benches, so everything's done. All the fighting is over. Jim is out having dinner with Brita. The students are enrolled. I have picked my bench and the place where it's going to sit. And there was an evening before the school began when it was the back left corner as you face the machine room, when I was able to stand there and say, well, I've enrolled myself as a student with Jim Krenov. And after that, everything rolled forward. But I think that moment of actually being able, it was quiet, no one was there yet, but they would be in the next day and I would be able to stand there. That was pretty precious. I like that.
I don't know if I could come up with a single moment so significant, but there are just so many events throughout the years that were enjoyable. One of them being the Christmas parties that we'd have. We turn off the overhead lights and have a lot of way too much good food and probably too much to drink too. And, it's just really a charming evening. The way that people socialized was gratifying, throughout the year. Some students didn't get enough of each other during the course of the day. They'd get together afterwards, make meals at somebody's house or go out in the town. And again, is that sense of community that was so satisfying to me.
Yeah. Laura, how about you? Favorite memory or representative event?
I knew this question was coming and I was like, oh, Jesus, I don't know. There's just so many of them. But actually, it was the Christmas parties. As David mentioned, I was like, that's such a special time of the year when you're halfway through and there's still another whole semester to go. And it's all dark and raining, hopefully, outside. And it's just a very, very kind of like cozy, sort of joyful time. But David has already mentioned that. I do remember one time it must have been, I think I was in the spring semester, my second year. I'm only guessing that. It was out back where we have elephants, and the prefab for the weavers hadn't been put in yet. So there was kind of a field there, a field of grass. And it was, the sun was setting in the west, and the sun was coming through the grass, and it was all waving there. And I just got this wave of like happiness that I can remember it still to this day. So that's whatever that is, like 20 odd years ago. Just this kind of feeling of, this is really good. This is where I want to be. And I don't think I mean, there were a lot of people smoking pot around me. I wasn't, but and I think I hadn't had very much, I don't think it was chemically induced, this feeling of happiness. But it was just very, very intense. I remember it still. Sometimes I go out there, I'm like, am I going to have that same feeling again? And I haven't.
Nice. For those who don't know, you referenced elephants. Could you just quickly tell us what that is?
Yeah, Friday evenings, getting together and just stepping over the property line to be on the Pacific Textile Arts, or the weavers side of the line, so that a bonfire and beer and relaxing and socializing.
Nice.
And it all started with Creighton. Creighton and Michael just would get together and discuss the week's events. And a couple students started tagging on, and then more students, till a shopkeeper chased us away. We circled cars in a remote parking lot and carried on there for a while until the police got wind of it. We moved to the back of the shop for several years until a disaffected student alerted the administration to our carryings on. Our response was, what? You can't drink beer on college property? So for a while, it was a movable celebration that we went to people's shops or homes. And then the Pacific Textile people moved in and granted us celebration space. And that, any Friday, it's not unusual to see a grad from some time past show up, because they know that's when to come.
Well, that sounds like a ton of wonderful memories. Some truly wonderful, some maybe not so much, but still great.
The bad ones are easy to forget.
Yeah. Alyssa, do you have, you said you had some questions, Alyssa, and do we have some others from the audience?
So far, we don't have any, but I would like to invite any participants to, share a question, and we'll be wrapping up. I know we're a little bit past 3, so thanks for everyone who came and joined us today. And if you do have questions, let us know. I have kind of 2. One of them is just how you've seen the program change, and you did briefly talk about how it hasn't really changed very much. And then my second question is for Laura, and that is what you see as your vision for the future of the program and what you'd like to happen with it. So take those as you will.
Well, it might be testing my ability to be diplomatic as far regards to how things have changed. I don't think they've changed very much at all as far as the level of instruction. And that's worked all this time. Jim really put a lot of importance on how he interacted with a project, that it should feel welcoming. He'd read on occasion from an article in the New Yorker by Ava Zeisel, about Ava Zeisel. She was a ceramicist, production ceramicist, and worth a Wikipedia search on her own, because she had a remarkable life. Well, he read from this article, and this is kind of a passage from it, that he, when he gave lectures, they were very rarely specifically techniques, but there might be details about techniques, but more generally about the work and why you're doing it. A student of hers passed her a mug for inspection. Well, she wasn't happy with the proportions. Not enough emotion yet. This play with the models, she said, is the defining moment of gestation. I think with my hands. I design things to be touched, not for a museum. A piece is ready when it has the shape of something to cherish. Once in a while throw around the Swedish phrase that Malmsteen used was wood to hand. And I think some of that warmth could bear a greater focus. Sorry, Laura. But the level of work coming out of there is still unparalleled, and the show at the museum just really brings that to light. I'm really grateful to have been associated with it, and throughout its career, and we're grateful. Until Laura came along, we never really had a professional educator, and she managed to kind of break the boundaries a little bit and expand. And she arranged for 2 out-of-town shows in San Francisco when she first came up here, and just a lot of innovation that we sorely lacked. We've been coasting between Jim's retirement and Laura's hiring, so I'm grateful she's there. End of rant.
Creighton, do you want to talk? Or...
I don't think I mean, I love listening, but I don't think I have anything useful to add. I mean, I think we've talked about what the program has preserved and the through lines that matter, and I think those are real. And where it goes next, that's definitely not up to me to comment on.
Well, I think yeah, the through lines are very strong, and even just keeping something the same is a worthy task in its own right. I've heard it described as the Ming vase theory. You're carrying a Ming vase and you don't want to drop it, so you do everything in your power to do that. So you don't want to, or otherwise known as, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But maintaining something is a worthy task in itself. And I think of what I received as my education there as a gift, and that's a gift that I want to pass along in as much as possible to new students. In terms, but okay, so you have this Ming vase that you're holding, that you don't want to break, that you want to preserve, but the context in which one does it changes, like the world outside is changing, so that it becomes the task changes even as you're doing the same thing. I think we live in, the world is changing, and I think that what we're looking at is bringing in a wider demographic of people, or at least attempting to. It's not easy, because woodworking has attracted a very definite demographic. I probably specifically since kind of like World War II onwards, and kind of trying to break outside of that is work, and trying to bring in a different different groups of people. So that's one thing. I think in terms of the kind of style or aesthetics, I'm kind of less concerned about that. I don't know that it's that important that things have to be Krenovian, particularly in their kind of style or aesthetics. I hope that students bring themselves and what they want to, show or bring into the world, and that our job is to help them do that. Having said that, obviously the role of a teacher is to guide people and have influence on that, but it's not the kind of primary focus. It's not my primary focus, kind of what things look like at the end. I guess that's all I have to say.
I always wish that there was a way to have Jim's philosophies without Jim's furniture. I mean, without furniture that looked like Krenov made, but is there a way to use what he was teaching and make something that's completely different?
Well, I know you're talking about woodworking, but as far as I'm concerned, in some ways I've been doing that for the last 30 years. That's a topic for another day, I think, but I think elements of craft in general, but also of how Jim approached work, I think they have informed my working life ever since we left Fort Bragg. I don't think they've stopped enriching and informing that. But like I say, that's for another day.
Well, and that is something I've heard throughout the interviews that we've done as well. Not everyone goes on to a career in woodworking, but they still often take those ideas and it takes a completely different form. So, and I don't see any other questions. I would say last call for any questions. And then I think we'll wrap things up. So.
Well, we have one more program coming up. I mentioned it at the top of the program, but I will repeat it again on August 4, Sunday, August 4, 1 p.m. Pacific time. It's a virtual program featuring 4 former students, and I'll name them here. Tim Coleman, Tammy Barty, John Shaw, and Phoebe Kuo will join us virtually. And we hope, speaking to our audience now, I hope you will join us as well for that. We'll have information on the museum's website, and we'll share the link through social media as well, a little closer to the event. I also want to thank Alyssa for curating a wonderful show. She put in a lot of work into it, and I think it's really paid dividends. It's a beautiful show. It closes on August 14, Sunday, August 14. Oh, I'm sorry. Sunday, August 18 is your last day to see the show. I hope if you haven't seen it, I hope you'll come out, or even if you have, it's definitely worth seeing again.
And on a side note, we will be having a catalog coming out, so keep your eyes peeled for that. It's on its way. So yes, and with any project, there's a lot of people involved. So we've certainly involved a number of people in this project, whether through oral histories or through the pieces in the exhibition, or certainly with our exhibition committee. So I don't see any further questions, and I think it's probably time to call it a day. But thanks for coming, everyone, and for sticking with us.
And thank you, Laura. Thank you, David Welter, and thank you, Creighton Hoke, for spending part of your Saturday with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank
All
you.
right, everybody. Yeah, we'll
Right.
we shall see you at our next virtual event, if not at the museum. Thanks again, everybody. Bye.
Bye.